I'm going to show you how to fit the new style HuMa S200 regulator to an S200. This is the air cylinder from a normal S200, which is made by CZ. I've drained this down, and you can do that by dry firing once it's off. If you stick a pokey device in there, there we go, you heard the last bit of air coming out. If you push that in, just make sure there's absolutely no air in it, just to be safe. Right. I've clamped this in my vise. You could use a workmate or whatever. A word of warning, S200 cylinders, in fact all air arms rifles, have extremely tight air cylinders. Not sure why they tighten them so much, but anyway, they are what they are. Unless your ends have been off before, it's going to be pretty tight. I've put a pin, which is just a steel hardened pin, into one of the holes in the end that has the quick fill on it. And that's just resting on the jaw of the vise. That's just to stop the cylinder twisting, because obviously if it twists in the vise, there's a good chance that even though I'm using soft jaws, the cylinder could get damaged. So the next step is to, I've got this little tool which basically has some holes in it, and the pins go in, which locate in the holes in the actual ends of the cylinder. I have got a tool that I'm now selling through my eShop. It's the S200 tool. It's basically a posher version of what I use. It comes with 4 pins. The 2 smaller pins are for the fill probe end, and the 2 bigger ends are for the firing valve end. Rightio. So what you want to do is fit your tool if you have one. Put the pin in through the hole in the tool. Line it up with the hole in the end. I'm trying to do this blind. There we go. And then pop the other one in the other end. Right. Then I've got what I call an air arms tool, which is one mother spanner. Obviously you don't need to use one as big as this. I just use this because it makes my life easier, and it fits on the nut that I have. If you've got one of the tools that sell, then you'll probably be able to use pump pliers or Stiltons or something along those lines, anything that will grip it. Right, I'll pop that on, adjust it to suit. Right, take up the slack, and then I find if you give it a bit of a tap, there we go, to get it going, get that out the way. That comes off. Right, there we go. Get my tool out the way. That's the firing valve. That's the pot. That's the O-ring. That's the firing valve that the hammer hits. Right, what you want to do is remove the pot. That's not normally very tight. Get that out the way. There we go. You'll see there's an adjuster in there. This is something that you'll want to play around with to try and get the best efficiency and shot count and what have you. Guys are saying that if you tighten this up all the way, there we go, it's tight, and then undo it one full turn, that should get you roughly where you want to be. Then the next thing you want to do is remove this O-ring. There you go. Just make sure it's all clean. And this face is nice and, no scratches or dents or anything on it. Then if you've ordered the S200 regulator, you should get something like that. They come preset, and in the bag you'll get, that's what's called the bus, or the standoff. It's basically a part with two O-rings in it, and then the regulator itself. If you order a regulator from me, it'll come preset to around 100 bars, which is about right for sub 12 foot-pound S200s. The next thing you want to do is have a look at the cylinder, make sure it's clean internally. that there's no scratches or marks or what have you, because obviously the O-rings on the regulator need to seal inside the cylinder, and they're not going to seal very well if you've got a rough face on your cylinder. So that looks pretty good. I'm just using a bit of silicone grease. You can use something like ABS M50 or silicone grease or whatever. I'm just going to put a bit on the O-ring just to help it on its way. I'm going to put a bit on this face because this bus sits against this. I'm only putting a bit, you don't need to go mad. And then I'm going to put a bit on here as well. Right. Now, you've got the brass adjuster. Whatever you do, don't play with this when you get the regulator, because like I said, it's preset. If you start adjusting that, you're going to mess up your reg settings, and then you're going to have a lot of fun getting your gun set up. Right, you want to pop that in, brass end facing towards the fill valve. Wiggle it in nice and gently. You don't want to damage the O-ring when you're pushing it in. Push it in until it goes past the threads. There you go. Don't need to go in too far. Then your bus. Again, make sure there's no fibres or hairs or dirt or anything on it, because that will cause all sorts of issues. Make sure that bit's nice and clean, and if you want to, you can put a bit of silicone on that, just to help the O-ring seat and seal. And then you screw the end back in, obviously without the O-ring on, because we've just taken that off, and tighten that up. Right, this is the bit that you've got to pay a bit of attention to. When you tighten it up, you want to tighten it up and leave a tiny little gap. So for reference, you can use something like a bit of paper, just so that there's a tiny little gap. There you go. I mean, you can barely see that, but there's definitely a gap there. That just allows the regulator to breathe. And there we go, that's the regulator fitted. A few things to note. There is also, if you look at the fitting instructions on my website, there is also an option B for fitting, where you actually, I'll show you, it's a bit more advanced, but you may find that it may be necessary if your regulator's playing up with the setup you have. It involves filing basically a little slot or groove across the threads to allow the air to bleed through past the threads. You normally only do that if your regulator is not cycling properly. If you're, for example, having a shot that's, say, 750 feet per second, then one that's 800, then 750, then 800, 750, then 800, it's doing what you call sawtoothing, and the regulator's not cycling properly. That could be down to the fact that the regulator is not breathing properly. So you may need to go to option 2, which is to you could, there's loads of ways of doing this. You could use a little hacksaw blade and just cut a little groove in. You could use a file, like a triangular file or a rectangular file on edge. Anything basically, a little milling machine with a tiny little bit, you know, whatever you can use to make a little groove in there. Like I said, you can obviously play around with that. That adjusts the preload on the firing valve. So that's, yeah, one way of tuning it, if you like. Right. Yeah. So once you've got this screwed in, remembering to leave the little gap. You can then fill it with air, and it shouldn't leak. You can always test with a bit of soapy water or something like Napier gun oil. I suppose you could use normal oil, but obviously normal oil has a tendency to eat O-rings, so it's probably best to use something like the Napier oil that doesn't affect O-rings, or soapy water. Just make sure you dry it afterwards, because obviously that's steel, and water and steel equals rust. once you're happy that there's no leaks, then you can screw it back onto the rifle, and then you start the adjustment. On the S200, this is a newer one, the Mark III, which has all the anti-tamper in place. You'll notice there's a little Venturi adjuster screw which has a anti-tamper stud on it that you can't get into unless you remove it. And then the actual hammer adjustment is there. That's your hammer springs inside there. You can just see it in that little slot. Basically, if you loosen that, it reduces the power, and if you tighten it, it increases the power, remembering the laws and legal limits in your country. Also, on the Mark III, there's a little grub screw which locks the hammer. You can see the Allen keys in it there. You need to loosen that. There's normally some Loctite in there, I think. You need to loosen that, and then you should be able to then adjust the hammer. The hammer, if all goes well, you should be able to adjust it just by using the tip of your finger. Sometimes there's a little stub on there which you can use a pair of pliers or something to grip to turn it. Or if you can get it out, you can always cut a slot in it so that you can adjust it using a screwdriver in future, which makes it a whole lot easier. The older models had a little grub screw with a locking nut on it, and no locking grub screw over there. Ideally, what you want to do with a sub 12 foot-pound one is make sure that this Venturi screw is completely open, so screwed out as far as it'll go, so that there's absolutely no restriction to the port. There's a port into the barrel from the firing valve, so when you shoot, the hammer shoots forward, hits the firing valve on the air cylinder over there, which then gives a blast of air which comes up through here, past this Venturi adjuster, up into the barrel, and out it goes. You want that so that there is absolutely no restriction in the barrel. If there is a restriction, there's a good chance your shot count will be pretty poor, and it's, keep that open at all costs. All adjustments to the power should be made using the hammer. So basically adjust your power using that. Reports so far on these guys are getting upwards of 60 shots from their rifle. So that gives you something to aim for when you're setting yours up. As I get more and more results in, I'll start updating my Facebook page and website with the kind of figures that you can expect. They're a new product. This regulator that I've just fitted for you is the very first one I fitted, and as you can tell, it wasn't too tricky. I'm not going on years of experience at fitting that. I read Harb's instructions and I fitted the regulator, and it took the best part of, it was probably longer to set up the camera than it was to fit the regulator. Any questions? Feel free to get hold of me via my website or Facebook page.